We're on to the book of Ezra today, and it's quite a short book with only 10 chapters. Again, it seems to be largely historical, so there's a lot of detail there that just allows you to skip through quite a bit in fast time. So for the third video in a row, we're going to do the full book in one video. So this is the chapters 1 to 10 and the summary. We come back to this guy, Cyrus the Great of Persia. It doesn't call him Cyrus the Great now, I googled him, apparently it's Cyrus the Great, which I think I've heard of, And it's talking about his heart being moved by God to allow the Israelites to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple of the Lord. And it refers to Jerusalem as being in Judah. So we've had lots of references to Judah of the tribe, but not necessarily so much as a place. So this seems to be a slight shift in that Judah is now being outlined as some sort of place. It's not quite clear how long this is after the Babylonians exiled the Israelites. I get the impression it's quite a long time, but there's nothing to particularly indicate that much time has passed. Albeit the book of Ezra itself takes place over the reign of 3 kings of Persia. So it does seem to be this book is set over a fairly short period, I think. But it seems like it's fairly well removed in time from the point at which Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon exiled the Israelites. It talks about Cyrus being so hospitable to the Israelites that he even goes to the Babylonians and gets back the 5,400 articles of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar nicked from the temple of the Lord, and he's given that back to the Israelites. Interestingly, there's no mention of the Ark of the Covenant, so I think at this point we're roughly sort of 2,500 years ago. So it does seem that already at this point the Ark of the Covenant might have been lost. There's a bit more boring detail about what happens and who goes back, but the headlines are that roughly 42,000 Israelites go back to Jerusalem. With them they take 200 singers, because it's important to whistle while you work, I suppose, and they take 6,720 donkeys with them. So, yeah. Whilst they're building this anyway, some Assyrians take some exception to this, and they don't like the Israelites, and they don't want them rebuilding their temple. So they write to King Xerxes by this point of Persia, who I believe is the freaky looking one that Gerard Butler tells to sod off. But in that he's weird and 11 foot tall or something, and this he sounds kind of normal and almost nice. So it raises questions. I mean, the Bible could be wrong, obviously, but it does raise the question that maybe the movie 300 is not a documentary. Sad, but never mind. Anyway, these Assyrians, they write to Xerxes and say, we don't like these Israelites. Did you know that actually they have a long history of rebelling against kings and being punks? So what you should do is toddle off down to the Babylonian archive, look up the history, and you will see that we are right. Xerxes anyway does this. He toddles down to his local Babylonian library, looks it all up and sees, oh yes, okay, these Israelites are historically problematic, and he orders all work stopped and it won't recommence until he gives the order. Interestingly, at this point, we have the first instance of the use of the term Jew and Gentile. The book seems to alternate, so one time it's talking about the Israelites being Israelites, the next time it talks about them being Jews. But I think that's really interesting to get the first encounter with that, and obviously it's linked to the land of Judah. You think Judites would have made more sense than Jews, I don't know why. But yeah, so historically vaguely interesting. We are then on to the next king of Persia, Darius, and it seems like the Israelites have started building the temple quietly anyway. And Darius inquires, what's going on here? So the Israelites write to King Darius and say, it's okay, Cyrus told us we could do this. Go back to the Babylonian archive, have a look through that, and you'll see that this is true. So I think this is only 2 kings later. So, I don't know if you need to pop down to the archive, but I guess you can't look it up online or anything, can you? So Darius anyway toddles down to the Babylonian archive, gets it out, sees, oh yes, Cyrus said you should do this, and gave it his blessing. Great, yeah, carry on, and I'll pay the bill. So yeah, the kings of Persia seem to be really nice people. At this point, we then have a shift in tone for how this is written, because Ezra turns up, who we're told is a priest, and there's a big long list of his great-grandparents, such that we see that he's 16 generations descended from Aaron, the brother of Moses. Initially, it talks about this stuff in the third person. But then suddenly it shifts, and the first time I've seen it in the Bible, someone writing in the first person. So Ezra's talking about going back to Israel, and he talks about people who came with me, and then a big old list of stuff. It's very odd. And I gather traditionally Ezra is supposed to be the author of the book of Ezra, but then it feels like it's written over quite a long time, so I'm not sure if that's quite true. If there's only 3 kings, and it's in the realms of possible, certainly. But it does feel like 2 authors, in the sense that the first half of the book is written in the third person, and the second bit is written in the first person. So, yeah, it's a bit odd. It feels unlikely that the whole thing was written by one person anyway. Ezra doesn't seem to do a great deal. I mean, he's a big deal of a priest who gets involved in building the temple. But the big thing it seems that he does is people come to him and point out that a lot of the Israelites have been intermarrying with people from other tribes. So they've got wives from the Moabites and the Jebusites and the Amorites, for example. I think largely all tribes that were supposedly wiped out some time ago, but clearly wasn't the case. But if you go way back, you may recall that God decreed that he didn't want the Israelites intermarrying with people from other tribes, for the reason that he didn't want the Israelite culture to be tainted, I suppose, to some extent by the practices of these other things and fake gods and all the rest of it. So in marrying women from other tribes, the Israelites are directly conflicting with what God has told them to do. So Ezra is tearing his robe, and he's very upset by this, and he does a big long prayer. And interestingly, in this prayer, he acknowledges that the Israelites have been total punks, and also the point that he's talking about being grateful that God has kept on giving them extra chances. Anyway, the Israelites seem to have some sort of meeting about this and what we're going to do to rectify this, and they come up with a nice, easy solution. We'll just get a wife and children, and we'll get rid of them. So not kill them, I think, just get shot of them. And then presumably they all go and get a bunch of PlayStations and have beer for breakfast and stop wearing trousers around the house or something, I don't know. Bit odd. So in the short version of what happens there, the Babylonian exile has already happened, and now the Israelites have been allowed to go back purely for the purpose of building the temple. But it does sound like they basically settled in. They're living in several towns around Jerusalem. And we have the birth of the terms Jew and Gentile. In terms of the interesting points to come out of that, this one does seem to be largely historical without any massive theological exciting things to grapple with. So, yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable. I also really like that Ezra has pointed out that God keeps giving them chances, because that was my conclusion from the book of Judges. I think it would be really easy to miss that and just see it as the Israelites just being a bunch of punks and then repeatedly being punks. But of course, on the flip side of that, God keeps giving them a chance and they keep them being punks. But yeah, that'd be really easy to miss that. So I'm kind of chuffed that Ezra has highlighted something that I think I'd already picked up, albeit, all the thousands of things I would have undoubtedly missed. But, there we go. And finally, it's really interesting that the temple is rebuilt, because it seems extremely unlikely that with any sort of naturalistic explanation that the king of Persia would have allowed them to do that. I don't believe the god of Israel was the god of Persia. I don't know enough about Persia. I know almost nothing about Persia, apart from there was a prince, apparently. So you think, why would the king of Persia care? He's got a whole big old empire to worry about, and he cares about this small band of exiled people being able to go back home and build themselves a temple to a god that you presumably don't necessarily agree with. It says that the god of Israel is the god of Persia, but I don't know. It just seems an interesting point. It says that God moves the king's heart to allow this, and in the absence of God moving the heart of the king of Persia, why on earth would the king of Persia allow that? So it's not quite evidence, I don't think, but it's interesting anyway. That's what I think from that. But yeah, that was good. It was short but sweet-ish. Interesting bit of history, I think. Assuming it's history. I perhaps ought to Google, does it agree with other stuff? But it doesn't seem significant enough. And the sort of only really interesting point is that the idea that the king of Persia would allow Israelites to do that. But next we're on to the book of Nehemiah. I don't know if Nehemiah is a person or what, so we'll go on and find out what's in that.